Hey y'all, it's Ashley Bookishrealm and I'm back with another video. So today's video, of course, is going to be pure chaos. It is my August wrap up. I have not written reviews for everything, so yeah, this is going to be absolutely crazy, but I did read a lot of great stuff. I'm excited to go over all of the great things that I did end up reading in August. I definitely got my reading mojo back starting since like July, so now I am back to kind of like my normal pace of reading, which is good. I know like I was struggling a little bit there in like April, May, and June. I kind of hit a slight slump, but now we're doing okay. So let's go ahead and jump into the books. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about Book of the Month. So if you didn't know, Book of the Month is a super popular, fast-growing online book service. Their mission is to promote new and emerging authors and to help readers find books that they're going to love. So the way that it works is that the Book of the Month team spends the month vetting through hundreds of books, and they come up with this specially curated list of books for readers to choose from, and these books are newly or early release titles, and it's basically a setup so readers spend less time researching and more time reading. And as you just heard me say, we do get opportunities to read early release titles, which is really cool. So sometimes you can pick a book that's not technically out on the market just yet. One of my favorite things about Book of the Month, and I always say this because I really do believe it's true, is that they have a wide variety of things to choose from, diverse, not just in the authors, but in the genres that they choose. So whether that's mystery, thriller, or romantic comedies, or sometimes it's YA books, historical fiction, nonfiction, memoirs. So it's a little bit of something for everyone to choose from. Book of the Month has a skip policy, which makes them risk-free. So if there's ever a month where you don't want to select something, you can just skip that month and you will not be charged for that month. Book of the Month also has the best prices for newly released hardcovers. If you're like me, you're balling on a budget at all times. I promise y'all, I'm constantly balling on a budget. It's just the way that I operate, and most newly released hardcover books are pretty hefty when it comes to price. So Book of the Month definitely will save you money. I do have a code that you can use this month at Bookishrealm to get your first book for $9.99, and I'll be sure to leave that code as well as the link to Book of the Month down in the description box below. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into the books for this month. So every month that you get Book of the Month, they will come in this beautiful blue box. One of my favorite parts about Book of the Month is the bookmarks that they send every month. This one says I tend to get lost, which is so ingenious because I can never keep up with my bookmarks. If you know me, I lose my bookmarks. I collect them, but I always lose them, and this is true. They tend to get lost. So the first book that we have this month is Rock, Paper, Scissors, and I think that this one is more of a mystery slash thriller where we have a couple. They've been married for a long time. One is a screenwriter. He's extremely busy, and he actually does not have any sense of facial recognition, so he doesn't recognize anybody, including his wife, and she's pretty fed up about the fact that he's not really paying her much attention. So they end up winning this trip to Scotland, and it's supposed to be their anniversary trip, but come to find out, they didn't technically win this trip. Somebody's planned it. Between the two of them, someone is lying, and some things and some secrets are going to be revealed, which I kind of like books like this. I don't know why I like reading books that are like marriage and crisis, but this one sounds really intriguing. The next one is The Neighbor's Secret, and this is about a group of women who live in this town that is supposed to be safe and a great place to raise your children, and they have this book club, and then they start getting harassed. There's vandalizing that happens that's specifically targeting the women of this book club, and they make this decision. It's three women. They make the decision that they're going to do whatever they can to protect themselves and protect their children, even if that means that someone has to end up dying. So I'm like 99% sure that somebody gets killed in this book, and the three of them are going to have to figure out a way to cover it up. It's a long shot, but that would make for a very interesting storyline. The next one that I have is Beautiful Country, and this is about Wong's journey in basically coming to America, and realizing the differences between China and America, and how her parents were well-respected professors, and when they get here they're not treated as such. And there are aspects that she ends up falling in love with, especially like in New York City, certain experiences that make her fall in love with America. But then something happens to her mom and she falls ill, and she's been not really taking care of the illness for fear of having to go to the hospital, especially, and I'm guessing from the context of this that they may be undocumented. And there's this ending tagline in the description that talks about the fact that she has to come to terms with that, and that she has always been taught to remember, you know, tell anybody that asks you that you're from this country, you're born here, you've been here all along. So I'm sure that this is heartbreaking. I'm 99% sure this is a very, very timely book, and the cover is absolutely gorgeous. The next one that I have here is The Sweetest Remedy, and this is by Jane Caro. This is the same author that wrote Ties That Tether. I read that book last year, and this one focuses on a main character by the name of Hannah, and Hannah is biracial. She has a white mother, and her father is an entrepreneur from Nigeria, but she's never met her father. They've never really had any interactions, and basically he ends up passing away, so she ends up having to go back to Nigeria and go to the funeral, and she gets introduced to a lot of cultural traditions that she was not as familiar with, because I'm guessing that she does not know that side of her family. And while there, of course, she finds romance. I think this is going to be interesting because this one touches a lot on identity, and one thing that I did like that Jane Caro did with Ties That Tether is that conversation about culture and identity and how that fits into the framework of someone who may be between worlds. So like in this instance, Hannah has a Nigerian background, but she's not as familiar with it because her father is absent. So I'm sure that's going to play a big role in how she perceives things and things that she learns when she's in Nigeria visiting her family and attending her father's funeral. And the last one that I have here is The Love Hypothesis, which is one that I'm really excited for because I've heard such great things about it already from those that have read advanced copies of it. It focuses on a PhD candidate by the name of Olive, who is trying to convince her friend that she is happy, but her best friend believes in love and long-lasting relationships, and Olive is kind of like, you know, I need a little bit more proof than just, you know, going out on a whim. So to kind of keep up this ruse that she is dating, even though she's not dating, she randomly kisses a guy who ends up being a professor, and he ends up not being the jerk that she thinks he is, because he has a reputation of being a jerk. And he is kind. He does a lot of great things for her, especially there's an instance where her job is on the line and he supports her through that. So this may end up being a romance that she did not expect coming, and she may get her happily ever after when she didn't believe in it because there's no scientific proof behind it. So this is one that I am definitely excited to read. All right, y'all. So those are the books for September's selection. Like I said, you could use my code Bookishrealm to get your first book for $9.99. I'll leave that in the link to Book of the Month down in the description box below. And thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. Okay, y'all, so I am going to attempt to finagle my way through this wrap up because of the fact that I am not really organized right now. I haven't finished all of my reviews on Goodreads just yet, and I can't even tell you how many books I read in the month of August. I just know that it was quite a lot of things that I ended up reading in August. So what I'm going to do is just go through what I've already reviewed, which will show up in my reading challenge, and then I'll go through my currently reading and talk about the ones that are at 99%. So I know y'all are used to me probably going through the books first and then saving like the comics, graphic novels, manga, and picture books to the end, but they're all going to be intermingled. As always, I do have that list broken down in the description box below with the timestamps. So if there's a particular title that you're interested in hearing about, you could just check out that list. Okay, so I ended up delving a little bit more into some children's lit this past month because I just wanted to get some, I guess, working knowledge of some children's series, especially some some stuff that I'm doing for work. So the first series that I ended up reading was the Jada Jones series, which is like a short chapter book series. They're only in between like 95 to 100 pages a piece, and these feature a young black girl just kind of going through school, dealing with friendships and all types of stuff. Really good stuff for like grades, I would say probably in between 2nd to 4th grade. So the first one that I ended up reading was Rockstar, and the second one that I ended up reading was Class Act, and these are both by Kelly Starling Lyons. And the first one is just about Jada dealing with a friend moving away and kind of the ups and downs that come with that, and making new friends and going back to school without having her best friend. And the second one, Class Act, focuses on a school, I guess, kind of president race, like, you know, class president, and she is going against a friend of hers, and it starts off going pretty well, and they have these rules that they're supposed to follow where they're not supposed to bash candidates, and then some things end up happening. So these also have illustrations with them. There's not really much to say about them because they are so short, but if you're looking for a new chapter book series for kids that you think might enjoy these, especially ones that feature a black main character, I would highly recommend checking these out. And I ended up giving both of these 4 stars. So the next kind of chapter books, and these are children's books, not middle grade. So the next one that I ended up checking out series wise is the Goddess Girl series. These are also good for grades 2nd through 4th grade. I would say that these are a good introduction to kids that want to read Percy Jackson but are not yet at that age group where they could read Percy Jackson. So there's actually 2 series that work with each other. They don't intercross to my knowledge, and that's the Goddess Girls and the Heroes in Training series. So I started off reading the Goddess Girl series. I read the first 2 in the series, which is the first one is Athena the Brain, and the second one is Persephone the Phony. These are also ones that are kind of filled with illustrations. The first one, Athena the Brain, focuses of course on Athena as she makes her way to this academy for kids that are children of like gods and goddesses, and in a different way than Percy Jackson, not half-blood, like they're actually gods and goddesses themselves. But Athena figures out that Zeus is actually her father, and he wants her to train at this school. This of course plays a lot on Athena's intelligence because that is what she is known for in terms of like myths and legends. And you get to meet some other characters that she, you know, gets along with. And of course Medusa is kind of painted early on in this one as the working villain of the group, but I'm interested because there are some books that are going to be from Medusa's perspective, and I'm wondering if like we get a clearer picture of her. And there are a couple people of course who are not technically goddesses, like Medusa's not technically a goddess. Pandora is also represented in this book, and she's not technically a goddess, but what the authors did with this is they really honed in on those Greek myths and legends. This is not the most accurate this is not the most accurate series in terms of like pulling from actual ancient texts, but it is a good starter for kids, like I said, especially those who are interested in like Percy Jackson and stuff but may not be old enough to read that just yet. I think this first one had some really great emphasis on the concept and ideas of friendships, and especially starting a new school and what that looks like and what that means. The second one, Persephone the Phony, is really interesting because it's about Persephone, who is the daughter of Demeter, having a relationship with Hades. So it's not the classic Hades and Persephone, if I can get that out right. It's not the classic Hades and Persephone tales that we're used to, meaning that this is not a romance. This is just about them being friends, and how Hades has this reputation that is not necessarily warranted. And Demeter's mother, of course, Demeter, who is Persephone's mother, does not want her to be friends with Hades, but they kind of work around that. So this is a kid-friendly version of the tale between Hades and Persephone's, which is why I'm saying like these are not 100% accurate, because if you're familiar with Greek legend and myth, and you know exactly what ends up happening between Persephone, Demeter, and Hades. But I thought that these were both pretty interesting. I ended up giving them both around like 3.5 to 4 stars. I will be continuing on with the series. I'm not sure when, but it is one that I do want to continue to dive into. The next book that I ended up reading was Planet Barbarians, which is of course the first book in the Planet Barbarians series by Ruby Dixon, which I think at this point this series has pretty much taken book 2 by storm. A lot of people have already started the series, a lot of people have finished it. I think that a great video to check out if you want some insight to the entire series is a video that was done by Mara. I'll make sure I link her video up in the card symbol above. But I am trying to slowly make my way through this series. I just started the second book not too long ago. I probably will finish it this month, but of course this focuses on a main character by the name of Georgie, who ends up with a group of women who are abducted by these aliens. They end up on another planet, and this is where Georgie meets Vectal. I think that's how you say his name, but she ends up meeting him, and it's in part a romance and then also kind of a survival story, because they're on this planet that is not really great for humans, and there are a lot of interesting things that happen in this book. I really like the chemistry between Georgie and Vectal. I am always surprised, because this is the second time that I read this. This is a reread for me. I'm always surprised about how much chemistry is existing between a human and an alien, and how, like, you know, they're completely different species and there is this communication barrier that they have, but some way they kind of figure out how to depend upon each other, how to rely on each other to save Georgie and the other women. And I think that it's building for an interesting world. This is a pretty long series, if I'm not mistaken, so you know, if you dive in, make sure you know that you're in for a pretty lengthy commitment. They're well written. I think that they're good kind of like books to consume in between heavy things. So I technically hadn't been reading a lot of heavy stuff just yet, but I think that these are great. And I don't want to just say filler books, because they do have more substance to them than just being quote unquote filler, but I do think that they're a good book to use in order to kind of like take a break from more difficult texts. And they're fun, they're quick. I don't think any of them are over like 250 pages, so whether you're listening to them on audio or you're reading them physically or digitally, they're pretty quick reads. And I ended up giving this one 4 stars again, and that was the same rating I think I gave it the first time. The next book that I read, which is easily going to be one of my favorite books so far of 2021, which I've been reading some really great ones this year. I'm gonna have a lot of fun making my top list at the end of this year, but it was Redemptor, which is the second book in the Ray Bear duology by Jordan E. Fueco. I read this one as an arc and was so excited that I was able to get it as an arc, because it was so beautifully done. It was so amazing. It literally picks up exactly where the first book has left off, and I can't tell you too much because I don't want to spoil the first book for you, because if you haven't read Ray Bear yet, I need you to pick it up. But it picks up right where Ray Bear left off, but we're getting a more complex type of environment with this one. Terasai has made some decisions at the end of the first book that are directly impacting decisions that she has to make in this book. And what I liked about this is that Ifueko did a lot of deep analysis of Terasai as a character. I think that it would have been easy to put Terasai into the chosen one trope, which a little bit of that is at play, but what I think I loved most about that is that she kind of flips the trope on the head, because Terasai is not a great chosen one, quote unquote, if you know you want to look at her that way. She definitely needs assistance in this book. She needs a lot of assistance in this book, and she doesn't necessarily know how to ask for it. And as a result of her not asking for assistance when she needs it, especially from other supporting characters that we meet in the first book, she struggles a whole lot. She struggles in a lot of ways that I think would have technically been easily resolved had she not been so stubborn, for lack of a better terms. There are some new characters that we meet in here that I almost also like don't want to say anything about, because these new characters are so important not only to the plot but also to the character development of Terasai. And this was a book that made me extremely emotional, and I don't know if it was like other things that I possibly had going on in my personal life or whatever, whatever the case may have been. But I do know that this book hit me like a ton of bricks, and it was an emotional roller coaster. I was happy, I was sad, I cried in one part, and if you know me, it takes a lot for me to cry in books, but there was one particular section of this book that really just truly just destroyed me and broke my heart and hurt my feelings, and I wasn't really sure how to grasp with that, but I think it was a brilliant end to a beautiful duology. I can't wait to see what Jordan Fueko is going to do in the future, because her world building skills and her writing skills are phenomenal. So if you can't tell, of course, I ended up giving this one 5 stars, and I'm just excited to see what else we're going to get from this amazing author. So the next one that I ended up reading was All You Need Is Love, which I think is such a cute play on the song All You Need Is Love, and this is by Tanya Guerrero, and I'm probably saying her last name wrong, but All You Need Is Love is a middle grade novel that had been on my radar since last year. I believe I put it on one of my most anticipated lists, and it was definitely a great read. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, but it focuses on a Spanish Filipino American main character by the name of Alba, who is sent to Barcelona to hang out with her abuela Lola, who she knows but doesn't have like a tight-knit relationship with. And the reason why she's sent to Barcelona is because of the fact that her mother is trying to leave her father because her father is abusive, and he is definitely emotionally absent and emotionally abusive to Alba as well. So I definitely would make sure you have that as a content warning, or have that point of reference in your mind before you do get into this book, because it deals a lot with Alba trying to process what it's like when you have 2 parents who are absent, one because of some issues they have and the fact that they're abusive, and then another who is absent because they're trying to figure out how to handle being in an abusive relationship while having a child. And it's tough. It's hard reading from Alba's perspective, because you can tell for a lot of times like she feels extremely lonely. She doesn't feel like she really fits in anywhere, and it's good that she ends up going to Barcelona, because she ends up meeting this baker who used to be a friend of her mother's prior to her mother meeting her father, and she works through a lot of things by not only building this relationship with her abuela Lola, but also because she takes the time to really invest in learning baking, and it helps her work through a lot. There are some great friendships that develop. I like that the author explored what that relationship dynamic was going to look like after her mother left her father, because it's clear that her mother has some emotional gaps in terms of her relationship with her daughter because of the abuse, and the author does not let that slide past. And I really appreciated that, because it could have been written in a way where the mother ends up leaving the father, and then Alba and her mother reconnect and everything be perfect. But in reality, it wouldn't be perfect, because there's a lot of broken things that exist now between Alba and her mother because of the abuse and the emotional impact the abuse has had on her mother, and it has turned her, for lack of better terms, into a absent parent. So I like that. There's a lot of cultural exploration. There's a lot of exploration in terms of identity with Alba, and I just like the found family aspect. I know, like, of course, Abuela Lola is her grandmother, but there are people who are within the book that play a significant role in giving Alba that sense of family that she didn't necessarily have at the beginning of the book. So I really enjoyed it. If you're looking for, a book that tackles some tough topics, but, also gives you that feeling of like, you get to read about food. If you're a foodie, I definitely would end up checking this one out. The next 3 books that I read were all by Shay Sanders, and one of them I can talk about. The other 2 I'm not going to talk about so heavily, because I think that if I do, it'll spoil the series. Although Shay technically says like you can read them as standalones, I personally feel like it'll be beneficial to read them in order, because I think you get the most out of it in terms of like characters popping in and out, and then there's one book that directly impacts another book. So I would just say, you know, they can be read as standalones, but if you want the most out of them, I would read them in order. So the first one that I can't tell you about is Legal Tender, which is the 5th book in the series, and this is the one that is directly impacted by the book that came before it. And I ended up giving this one 3 stars. This one focuses on Nekima and Cordell. This is an age gap romance. Nekima is older. She works in the HR department of the company Billingsley Davis, which is where all of this takes place. Like all these books take place. I can't talk today, but these books specifically are workplace romances. I don't know if I said that. I probably didn't say that, but they're workplace romances, and this one is a workplace romance with an age gap. Nekima works in HR. Cordell works as a lawyer, and the reason why the two of them meet is because in the previous book we had 2 friends who worked at the company end up getting together and making a sex tape that they end up selling. So then we pop into this book, and these 2 characters are trying to navigate what to do as a result of those previous 2 characters making that sex tape, which is why I said sometimes it's kind of good to read this stuff in order. So yes, basically what ends up happening in this one is that the 2 of them meet each other. They're working on this case together to determine what they're going to do, like what legal ramifications this would possibly have on their company, if any at all. And I wanted to like this one more than what I liked it. The reason why I gave it 3 stars is because Nekima was very, very frustrating as a heroine. She is clearly, and with good reason, she is apprehensive about being into any type of relationship, whether that is like friends with benefits or romantic or whatever, with this guy, because he's 24, she's 40, huge age gap, but she just can't get over it. And she constantly makes reference to the fact that she has sons the same age as him, and it's like, we get it, we understand that, we know that Cordell is young, but stop telling this man that he's the same age as your sons. Like, this is a grown man, or he's close to the age of your sons. This is a grown man, he is a lawyer, he's well established. Like, if you're gonna do it, just go for it and just stop. I think having that initial apprehension would have worked, but it was like continuous. It was such a continuous thing, and it just absolutely drove me crazy. But there was one scene at the end, because Nekima has a relationship with the father of her 2 kids, and the relationship is not appropriate, really. It's not like they get physical or anything, but he utilizes the relationship as a way to keep tabs on her and to keep her in a place where she's always going to be single. And he clearly doesn't want her to be in a relationship with anybody else, even though he's already moved on, and I think he's engaged at this point. But there's a scene where Cordell handles all of, I think it's in this book. If it's not in this book, it's in another book, but trust me, either way, there's a scene at some point, it may not even be in this one, it probably is not in this one, I don't think it's in this one, I think it's in the holiday one. But anyway, Cordell does eventually work that relationship out, but he's a huge problem in that first book. Like, her ex-husband is a huge problem. I think they were married. They may not even have been married. I think maybe they just were ex-partners. I don't know, but I did not like this one as much as I thought I was going to like it, as much as I had liked the previous one. So like I said, I only ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, so the next one in the series is Naughty or Nice, and I gave this one 4 stars. This is a holiday one, and it's technically book number 6, and it's a holiday one where we get to see all of the couples. However, there's one specific couple from the second book in the series that we don't see in this holiday wrap up, and I was confused as to why we didn't get any update on them whatsoever, because they were actually like one of my favorites, and I would have loved to learn more about them and what ended up happening, but we don't get any perspective from them. But we do get perspectives from everybody else, and this is the one where we see Cordell kind of check Nekima's ex-husband, ex-partner, whatever the case may be. But it was nice kind of seeing everybody in their current relationships, where they were, like, you know, where everything kind of ended up going after their books ended, because some of them we didn't get like clear like lines of what was going to happen in their relationships, but in here we kind of do get those nice little wrap-ups. So this is a good one to read for the holidays. I'm glad I read it because it did tie stuff up nicely. Now the 7th book in this series, and I don't know if it's not really titled as a 7th book. It's titled as an on the clock novelette, and it's called Before I Do. I gave this one 4 stars, and I could tell you absolutely nothing about it, because if I tell you anything about this book, it will completely spoil the 3rd book in the series, and I don't want to do that because I think it's important for you to kind of see what happens on your own and not for me to give it away. And there's no description on Goodreads, which I'm glad that there's no description on Goodreads. So this is not technically the 7th book, but I would not pick this one up until you've read all 6 of the previous books. And then from what I saw on Instagram, Shay has another one coming out in the series, or it should probably already be out by now, and I'm so excited to read it. So sorry I can't tell you anything else about this one, but it was good. That's all I can say. It was filthy and it was good. 4 stars. Now, I did end up reading a great deal of picture books. When I say great deal, I read like 5. I read 5 picture books, and there's more that I probably read that I just haven't marked as read. But some of these I was reading as arcs to do reviews for. So the first one is the 1619 Project, Born on Water by Nicole Hannah-Jones, Renee Watson, and Nicholas Smith. And the illustrations in this book alone are absolutely gorgeous. Of course, if you've heard anything about the 1619 Project, or if you haven't heard anything about the 1619 Project, I would implore you to open up a tab and do some research on it. There's been a lot of controversy around the 1619 Project and the person who has done the research behind it. This is a picture book that talks about the origins of not necessarily origins of the 1619 Project, but it takes what would be the beginning of that project and puts it in a way that is accessible for children. And it focuses first on a young girl who has to write or do a project for school, and it's a genealogy project, and it's kind of like a struggle for her because she's Black, and she's like, all right, like, I know my family tree up to a certain point, but I can't tell you any more past that. And for me, as not only just like a Black person reading it, but also as a Black parent, this book is super important, like very, very important. And it's key to a lot of things, of understanding a lot of things, because for a lot of Black people, and I won't say all, because that would be working under the assumption that all Black people can't trace their lineage like super, super far back. And that's not necessarily true. Like, that's not true for me on my dad's side of the family, but it is true for me on my mom's side of the family. And this book is important because I think people don't realize how much of a kind of privilege it is to be able to trace your lineage back like far, 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 and know exactly where your family came from. But for a lot of Black people, they can't do that because, you know, with the time 1619 is when the first slave, not even the first slave, the first stolen individual from the shores of West Africa was brought to North America, the Caribbean, you know, just that general area, to be a slave. I think when you think about it in that terms and how slavery started, all of that history and record keeping in terms of lineage is completely lost. So for a lot of Black people, they don't know where they come from. They don't know, you know, their ancestry. They can't trace it back because there was no records, or if records were keeping, I mean, what is the likelihood of how true those records were going to be? So I like that it takes all of that and it puts it in a poetic and beautifully illustrated book that is accessible for children. I think this is a great nonfiction read. It's a blend of fiction and nonfiction because a lot of it is true, but it's set against the backdrop of a fictional character trying to identify her genealogical lineage. And it's such a great read, y'all. I mean, the artwork, I wish I could show you the artwork, but the artwork is absolutely stunning. It is beautiful. If there's a picture book that you should have a copy of, I know BookTube is not big on picture books. I should have already talked about that and put that video up on my channel at some point, but I know that this is one that I would recommend, like all of BookTube like needs to pick up. It's a book that is a must buy. The next one that I read was In My Neighborhood, and this was a very interesting picture book because I didn't read a summary of it and I had no idea what to expect going in, because it's not as clear cut from the the cover of it, but it is about a drum that feels like it's kind of ostracized from the rest of the instruments that live within this town, this neighborhood. It's like a neighborhood of instruments, and it's a little bit more difficult for the drum to find its place because the way that it produces music is not the same as other instruments, and it's not appreciated as much. So for me, a lot of this picture book was like a double entendre. I think that it is a great book for those who are musicians who play drums, because they are so vital into laying that core beat for a lot of music, if not all music. And I think that sometimes there's a lack of appreciation for the drums and those who play the drums. And then also I feel like it is an ode to those who often don't feel like they fit in. So this can be read as, just two meanings behind one story, but the artwork was absolutely beautiful and I really ended up enjoying it, especially not knowing what I was getting myself into, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. The next one that I read was really interesting. It was just really short and cute, and it's Chaiwala, and I did not know that this was an actual thing that does exist. So it's about a young girl, and I believe she's with her mother, who takes a 10-minute stop at the station in Jaipur, and they visit a chai stand, and the picture book actually goes through like the process of making chai, and it gives like a big, I guess, honor to the tradition of stopping and going to a chaiwala, and teaching more kids about what that means culturally. And I mean, it educated me as an adult, because I mean, of course, like I've heard of chai before, but I've had chai before, but I did not know that a chaiwala, like a stand that sells chai, is such a huge thing, especially the fact that they're stopping, when their train takes a stop and they have that 10-minute break. This is what people would traditionally do. So the artwork was really, really great in it. If you want to learn more, if you're looking for, as I always say, I talk about it on BookTube, like the windows, mirrors, doors, and you're looking for like a window or sliding glass door into someone else's experience, I definitely would recommend this one. And I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, if I didn't say that already. The next one that I read was Usha and the Big Dipper. I ended up giving this one 4 stars as well. This is a very unique way of teaching math. So it is like your traditional story, but also it talks a little bit about math in terms of like spatial things. I'm not good with math, so I could be using the wrong terminology, but it's about these 3 girls who look up at the Big Dipper and they all see different things. Like one sees a big digger, one sees a Big Dipper, and I think the other one sees like maybe like a kite or something like that. I'm not sure, but it's all about like different perspectives. And I think that is applicable in math as well, but I think this is great for kids who may not necessarily do well with traditional way of learning math. Like I would have loved a book like this as a kid, because thinking about math and the spatial aspects that go into math, and just math, looking at it for what it is for me, was very, very difficult as a child. So having something like this that is fun, engaging, diverse, but also teaches those basic mathematical skills that some children may struggle with, I would have loved something like this, which is why I always say I think that kids nowadays are getting access to some really, really great resources, and I'm glad that things are changing where they're able to have different ways to look at things, because the black and white perspective of looking at a lot of things, and not just, when we think about like social aspects, but even like hardcore sciences and mathematics, I think it helps, and it gives a greater appreciation for those fields that some of us are like deathly afraid of. I'm deathly afraid of math and science. So yeah, and like I said, I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The last picture book that I ended up reading was Dad Bakes, and I only gave this one 3 stars because I wanted a little bit more out of it. What's interesting is that it's this narrative that focuses on a young girl who, you know, it's from her perspective. She's talking about how her dad gets up and he goes to this bakery, and it's kind of just like his day-to-day of what he does and what she does and why he's kind of, actually doesn't even go into why. It just talks about him going to this bakery and getting up and then coming home. And it was supposed to be a book, and I wouldn't have known this had I not read the author's note. It was supposed to be a book that talked about the experience of these bakeries that give second chances to those who have just gotten out of prison. It gives them a job and a steady income. And I think it was supposed to be talking about how, like, and it doesn't specifically say that the dad is like a felon, but I know like a lot of times when people do get out of jail or prison, they have a very, very, very difficult time finding a job where they're not being screened, you know, like, are you a convicted felon? Or, you know, do you have any, like, you know, any type of record whatsoever? And I think that's what the author was trying to do, but you would have never gotten that if you didn't read the author's note. So what ends up supposed to be being like a impactful book about these organizations that are helping those who are getting back up on their feet is lost because you don't know what the story is about until the very end with the author's note. And then it's just a book about a dad who bakes bread, who gets up early and bakes bread. And, you know, I feel like it would have been better suited if the author had taken some time to incorporate those narratives within the context of the book instead of leaving it to the end, because I'm telling you, like, as a parent myself, most times, like, I'm not going to read the author's note because my child's not going to want to hear the author's note. Like, we're reading the story itself, and, you know, I may read the author's note on my own time, but not while I'm reading it. So I think that there was a lot that could have been done in this book, and it just was not done. So yeah, it was a 3-star read for me. After that, I read a middle grade science STEM type of book. It's Maya and the Robot, and this is by Eve L. Ewing, and I really enjoyed this one. I believe I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. It focuses on a young girl by the name of Maya who is supposed to be working with this robot. So it's interesting the way that this starts off, because you are technically starting the book with the ending, not the complete ending, but something has gone wrong with this robot, and we are seeing exactly what has gone wrong with the robot. And it's kind of like Maya going back and saying, like, okay, so this is exactly how we got to this point. So it was really, really cool. I thought it was interesting and fun, and it's great to see a Black girl who's the center of STEM, which I know is something that a lot of people are looking for now, is more young girls of color being featured in STEM related things, whether that's books, whether that's recruiting, whatever the case may be. So it's nice to see her at the forefront of that. There's a lot of different themes incorporated in this too. There's a close-knit community that we get insight to. There are some adjustments that Maya is having to make, because when she goes to school, she's used to being with 2 other students who are close friends, but as they go into this new grade, they're actually separated, and she's in a class of her own. She doesn't really feel like she fits in. She doesn't really feel like she's making new friends, and all of that stuff gets explored with this STEM and this robot aspect in the background. So I think that it was just a quick read. I mean, it was fun. I really enjoyed it. I'm hoping that maybe we get more. I don't know if this is necessarily going to be a series. It may just be a standalone, but I hope that we get more, because I would love to see more of Maya. So then I ended up reading 3 more romances, and the first one was Being Hospitable by Mika James. This is the first book in the Desert Rose hookups, and this book was hot. So this is dating your best friend's, dating your brother's best friend, except it's sapphic. Yeah, that's it. So it's dating your brother's best friend trope, but it's a sapphic romance, and it is 2 Black women. It was so good. It was so good. So it focuses on 2 main characters, Kiki and Charlie. Of course, they know each other because Kiki's best friends with Charlie's brother, and I believe that Charlie is going through some things. So Charlie's brother asks if Charlie could move in with Kiki. He says yes. There's an undeniable attraction between the two. It's clear from the jump that there's an undeniable attraction, and it's their exploration of that attraction. I think what I love most about this is that even though Kiki was really nervous about telling Charlie's brother, because I mean that's her best friend, like with your sister type of situation, I think that I really enjoyed that no matter how fearful she was, she refused to keep that from, her best friend. She did not want to continue on and be like, I'm going to hide this, I'm going to keep this from him, but she felt like it was necessary, and I really, really respected that. My only criticism, which is a criticism of everyone who has read this book, is that it definitely should have been longer. I would have killed for this book to be longer because it was just that good. But yeah, I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. So the next one that I read is my first Jessica Cain book, and I heard about Jessica Cain from Bree from In Love and Other Words, and she told me to be prepared for a wild ride, and it was a wild ride. So the first one that I read, and this is the first one because I read 2 Jessica Cain books this month, and the first one I read was Husky, which focuses on a plus size heroine, and our plus size hero, and our heroine Parker is a fashion designer's fashion week, and she's having a lot of trouble trying to get these slim models to kind of, I guess, fulfill her vision of what she wants in terms of clothes. So she kind of goes out walks into a bar to kind of, take her mind off of it, figure out some inspiration that she may need. And when she walks to the bar, she meets Dawes. Dawes is a husky guy, and she feels like he is the perfect fit for what she wants to do with her clothing line. And I thought that some of the, insta-love aspect of it, the dialogue, some of it was unrealistic. I had struggled a little bit with Dawes' internal dialogue because it's told in dual perspective, because he is not confident in himself. It's not necessarily the most positive plus size rep, but he definitely questions like why Parker would possibly be interested in a man like him, especially when she's in the fashion industry. But I thought that it was sweet and endearing, and that they both took a leap of faith. And I think that the steamy scenes were hot. They were they were really hot, and I really enjoyed them. But I think that Jessica Cain is just one of those authors that does some wild stuff, and you kind of you got to go with it, and just not think about it too much, just go with the flow and you'll be okay. So I ended up giving that one 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Leslie's Curl and Dye by D.L. White. This is a first book in a series. I can't remember the name of the series off the top of my head, and it's not listed on Goodreads, but it is the first book in a series, and this is a second chance romance that takes place in a small town. Of course, it's about Leslie. She runs this salon, Leslie's Curl and Dye. And what's so interesting about this book is that it is about Leslie and Casey. So Leslie is running, like I said, this salon, and she's having issues in terms of like money and clientele, because Casey, who was playing in, I believe he was playing in the NBA, he got injured, he comes back home, he opens up a shop of his own, and it's almost like they're competing in a small town. And what I liked about this book so much is that it's kind of like a twofold story. So you have this slight drama that's going on between Casey and Leslie because of the shops that they own, but then there's this issue with the mayor as well of this town. And now, of course, I remember the name of the series. It's the Potter Lake series, I believe is the name of the series, because it all takes place in Potter Lake. But it ends up being really interesting because, like I said, there's this issue with the mayor, who has kind of promised people, like if they open up businesses and stuff like that, he'll take financial responsibility for some things, and come to find out, like, he's kind of lied about it. So Casey's pretty much like pissed about the situation because it's put him into some tight spots, and he was guaranteed financial assistance from the mayor, and he's not getting it. So there's that like drama that ends up being a major part of the book, which brings Casey and Leslie back together. And I thought it was great. I think they go through some great character development. I love that the plot was just so dynamic. There was so much going on with the plot, and not too much that it felt like, oh my gosh, like there's a lot going on in this book, but it just felt like there was a good balance of stuff going on that I didn't get bored, because it is a fairly long book. I believe that it's over 300 pages, or yeah, it's over 300 pages. So it was a nice balance of stuff going on. I love the emphasis on the, you know, black salon, black barber shop, because they're both very vital to the black community. And I think that D.L. White did an amazing job incorporating all of that into the narrative and giving that reader that kind of perspective. So I really did enjoy it. I ended up checking out the second book, which is more of a novella to the series, and I'm currently reading it. I got it on KU, but I highly recommend this one. This was my first D.L. White book, and it definitely won't be my last, because she has a pretty good backlist. The next thing that I ended up reading was Twins by Varian Johnson. So Twins is a middle grade graphic novel about twins who end up going to middle school with Maureen and Francine, and they're best friends, and they're used to doing everything together. But as they get to school, they start to realize that, like, things are not as they seem, and what ends up happening is that Francine starts wanting to develop not a persona, but she wants to be her own person, because they're so used to being identified as like one and the same, like twins. And I'm sure twins probably go through this, where they want to be individuals, but people associate them together so much because that's how they have grown up. And then as they get older, they want to be, you know, recognized as an individual. So things get kind of complex in this one, where you end up seeing most of the story from Maureen's perspective, because Fran is just kind of doing her own thing. But they learn a lot about each other, and they learn what it means to be individuals, and what it means to still have respect and love for your sibling, especially your twin, but still it's okay to be like, I just want to be my own person. So there is a big thing that happens, and I don't think that, yeah, it's not mentioned in the summary, so I won't mention it here, but there's this big thing that happens that really tests, like it really tests their relationship, and they have to navigate it and get through it. I love the role that the parents played in this book. It was really nice to see like how hands-on they were, and then also how hands-off they were, and allowing them to figure things out. And I really just enjoyed that balance. The artwork was really good. Trying to find a page that's not like super spoilery, maybe like something in the beginning, but yeah. So the artwork is really good. I'm a huge fan of middle grade graphic novels. If you did not know, this is one that I had been meaning to read but had not got a chance to read it yet, and I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. So the next thing that I ended up reading, which I was slightly disappointed by, not even slightly, I was super disappointed by, and it's The Black Kids. And this was one of my most anticipated reads for last year. I never got to it, and I ended up reading it this year, a year later from its publication date, and I only ended up giving this one 3 stars. And I was really kind of going back and forth between 2.5 and 3 stars, and I ended up going with just giving it a solid 3. And what's interesting about this one is that it's set against the backdrop of the 1992 LA riots, which of course came as a result of the beating of Rodney King. And I don't know of any YA books that have taken that specific, you know, aspect of history and having, you know, incorporated it into the narrative. And I thought that that was engaging, and I thought it was going to be interesting, you know, to look at that from a historical lens. But the difficulty that I had with this is that Ashley, who's the main character, she's not likable. Ashley's not a likable character. I was not feeling her at all. I think the intention was to write this story about a black person looking at the racial scope of this event from a place of privilege, wealth, and being sheltered. And it's clear that Ashley has been sheltered. It's absolutely clear there are some friend dynamics that are not great, you know, with her having white friends that feel comfortable saying some racially insensitive things around her. And I think because of how she's been sheltered and how she perceives race from the position that she's in prevents her from saying things. But Ashley does some really screwed up things, and it's hard to root for her as a character. I didn't like her, to be honest with you. Like the naivety, the lack of, you know, doing what would be the right thing. She does some screwed up things to, granted, some of the girls that she's friends with, I mean, they're not really friends per se, but it didn't warrant a certain thing that she did to her. I didn't like what she did to a friend. I mean, the girl really wasn't a good friend, but I still don't like what she did. And it was weird the way that was handled. That there was something else that she did to another main character, and it really pissed me off to no end, because I was like, I'm not sure if I am supposed to like Ashley as a character, because I really don't. And when I don't like a main character, it's really, really hard for me to get into them. And I can dislike them, but I felt like Ashley didn't have that many redeeming qualities about her, so that made it even more difficult. I really liked her sister. I wish that the book focused more on like her sister. It didn't, but I wish it did, because I thought her sister was an interesting character. I think that it does some really interesting and unique things in terms of identity, like Ashley recognizing, you know, the intersection between being Black and a woman, and what that means to be a Black woman in America at any specific time in history. But I think with her having to come to terms with that, I think that was an important part of it. But the way that the book was written, I feel like that narrative just gets lost in the book overall. And the way that the book kind of jumps around too, from like before the event, after the event, it just makes it a hard book to keep up with. And I just was not happy with the way that everything turned out. So like I said, I teetered between 2.5 and 3 stars. And I ended up giving it 3 stars because I think I got the intention. I just don't like the execution. And you have a very unlikable narrator, so it just made it a not easy book to consume. Unfortunately, after that, I read another disappointment, in which I really was teetering on my rating for this one too, and that is Blackout, which was, I believe it's edited by Danielle Clayton, but it, you know, has stories from Danielle Clayton, Tiffany D. Jackson, Nick Stone, Angie Thomas, Ashley Wood Folk, and Nicola Yoon. Y'all, I mean, I think I get what Blackout was intending to do, and what it was intended to do, its purpose. It is a collection of short stories, and the emphasis of every short story is about Black love. And I always say that I think that that is extremely important for teens also, to be able to see Black love. I know I talk about it a lot whenever I'm talking about like romance that I consume. If you know, I primarily read Black love romance, and everyone who is on this roster for this book is a good writer within their own right. I have read from every single author on this list. Every single author. I have consumed at least one of their books. Well, maybe not Danielle Clayton. I don't think I've read anything of hers. But for the other 5, I have read at least one of their books, if not more. And everybody who's on this list is not a romance writer. And it is clear as day when you get to their stories that they're not romance writers. And that doesn't make them a bad writer, but just because you're a writer does not mean that you can write in every genre. And that's just the truth. I mean, it doesn't say anything about them as people, as writers, about what they have done in terms of what they have written before. But sometimes you can't cross genres because it's not in your skill set to cross genres. Sometimes you write in a genre and you're good at it, and that's where you're at, and you know, that's where you're meant to be, and that is your strongest suit. I think that the intentions of this were great, the execution just was not there. And I'm not going to even get into every single story because I would be here forever talking about every single story, and I'm already pushing time. But I was not a huge fan of Angie Thomas's story at all. I think that hers was kind of the standout in terms of like, I don't know if she should have been a part of this thing, and maybe it's not my place to say that, but I think that she's a strong writer. I just don't think romance is where, you know, where she writes. And of course I love Tiffany D. Jackson's just because I feel like Tiffany D. Jackson is one of the strongest writers out of this group, if not the strongest. I thought that Nick Stone's story was good, but there was kind of like this emphasis in, like, I don't want to say woke, I don't want to say that because that's just not right, but the character was so socially aware of something that just, it was it's not saying that he shouldn't have been aware of it or that it shouldn't have been said, but it was just so off. Like it was just thrown in there, and so it just kind of makes you look like, I get where you're going, but like it just wasn't the right time, nor did it feel like it had a place in the story. I don't know. So I struggle with this one a lot too. I really feel like I was teetering between a 2-star and a 3-star rating with this one, and I decided based on like the individual stories, the ones that I did end up enjoying, I would give it a 3-star, but this was a disappointment. I was really looking forward to Blackout, and it just was not, it wasn't it for me at all. Like, not at all. Okay, so I also have some books that are currently reading on Goodreads, but these are books that I technically have already finished. I just have not been able to get my reviews up yet. The first of these books is The Diviners by Literati. This is the first book in the Diviner series. I did quite a bit of rereading this past month as well, because there are some series that I wanted to finish. There's some ones that I've been wanting to dive back into, The Diviners being one of those. This is one of my favorite series by Literati. This focuses, of course, on Evie, who leaves Ohio. She has this gift that she can touch objects and she can tell you like the history of that object, what it's been through, and she's sent to live with her Uncle Will in New York City. And we are introduced to all of these characters, a cast of characters that all have these different abilities, and it possibly makes them what is called diviners. They're supposed to be stopping this guy who's trying to resurrect himself and bring forth like basically hell on earth, and it's about them solving this case because it's taking place in the form of like murders, and each time a murder happens, this guy or this killer is taking body parts, whether it's eyeballs, limbs, skin, whatever, and it's especially haunting if you listen to this on audiobook. This is a perfect book for fall, Halloween time, and I just wanted to continue to reread the series. I was going to annotate this one, but I ended up listening to it on audio, so I may reread this one for a 3rd time, probably next year, so I can annotate my copy. The next book in the book is Layer of Dreams, which I think I'm going to read physically and annotate, but it was nice to kind of dive back into this world. It's well written. If you do listen to it on audio, you're going to enjoy it because it's done by January Lavoie. It's a diverse group of characters. I think that Literati makes some very interesting points about what was going on socially in the United States at this time when we're looking at what certain marginalized groups were facing. I think that she does a great job at that, and I think that the voices of each character are so well defined that they never get confused, because all of these books have such a wide range of characters, a wide cast of characters, and if I'm not mistaken, I think even by the time we get to the second book, that cast expands more, but she writes it in a way that you don't get them confused. They don't get muddled together. Everyone has their defining characteristics. Evie is not the most likable character, but if you don't like Evie, I will say, you know, you do get characters from, you know, you get perspectives from different characters, which kind of eases that constant having to deal with Evie's obnoxiousness, because she's obnoxious, but she has her reasons. She's a flawed character, and all of them are flawed characters, but Diviner's one of my favorites of all time, and you know, I'm glad I still have this OG cover. This is the old cover that it's hard to find this cover nowadays, but I'm so glad that I do have it. Next, I ended up finishing, finally, because I've been talking about it since last year, I ended up finishing the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. So the 4th one being the Battle of the Labyrinth, and the 5th one being the Last Olympian. I can't tell you too much about these because of the fact that these books, of course, are you know, part of a series. This is a conclusion. It's so far deep into it that if you haven't read the series, it's not really much that I can share. I think that these are super well written. I think when I first read these, I gave Battle of the Labyrinth 5 stars. I think when I do go and I sit down and or, you know, write my review, I probably will end up giving that one more 4 stars. But I think The Last Olympian, I may go up on my rating because I think, yeah, no, I'll keep it the same. So The Last Olympian, I'm going to end up giving this one 5 stars because this is a series conclusion, initial series conclusion, that literally like tears you down and builds you back up. It's a lot of tragic things that happen in this, and I forgot how sad this was because it goes all the way back to the first book, where we get to really see everything come to a head between some of the most important characters that we're going to get in the entire like Percy world, which is 15 books. And I really appreciated that, like, coming full circle and seeing exactly what has happened and what the characters have gone through and the final decisions they have to make to save their, you know, to save everybody from being overthrown by Kronos and, you know, the rest of the Titans. So yeah, I will keep this one at 5 stars. I did end up reading White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson, which does not come out until I believe the 14th of September. And this, oh gosh, I've been talking about this book a lot, so I don't even know if I really should talk about it that much because that's all I've been talking about is White Smoke. And this is a, oh gosh, it's on the back. It is Get Out meets The Haunting of Hill House, which is a YA psychological thriller, and it focuses on this young girl, Marigold, who is now part of this blended family. Her mother has married a white man, and this white man has a daughter, and the whole family ends up moving from, I believe were they in California? Well, anyway, they end up moving to this new town, and it's eerie. Her mother gets like this grant to work there as a writer, and they're supposed to be living in this house for a few years, and the house is like low-key haunted. It's a lot of stuff that happens in this book, and it has some, like, it's a thriller, but there's some horror elements in it, and this book scared the crap out of me. I just want y'all to know that this book scared me, like frightened me, like I had to stop reading it at night because of the fact that it just made me panic. Like I could hear my neighbor, and I was like, I would freak out anytime like I heard my neighbor move or do anything. I was like, I'm just gonna stick to reading this during work. There are some body horror elements in it that just like made me itch. It was so disgusting. But it's fast paced, it's great writing, it's Tiffany D. Jackson. I talked about this a lot in even my discussion video where I talked about I'm a reader with aphantasia, like how brilliant the writing is in this book. I think that most people are going to be disappointed partially by the ending, and I can't say anything, I won't say anything. It was not the ending that I was expecting, and it's not going to be an ending that a lot of people are going to expect, and some people are going to be like, yeah, well, but I liked it. I enjoyed it. It wasn't as good as Grown. Grown was a 5-star read for me last year, but this is like a solid 4-star or 4.5. I'm still kind of going back and forth about what I actually want to give it, and I'm not sure yet, but I'll make that decision. But White Smoke, definitely a great book. I also ended up reading Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Barron. This was okay. So I've heard that Kaylin Barron's second book, This Poisoned Heart, is much better than this one. This is a Cinderella retelling, except it is 200 years after Cinderella supposedly has died, and all of the women that are within this town have to go to this ball where they're basically like marketed. They're auctioned off. I mean, they're not literally auctioned off, but it is a ball for them to go to where they have to match with someone. Like, they have to be chosen by a man, and a lot of things go horribly wrong. I mean, Clearly, this is a huge discussion against the patriarchy. What happens a lot of times in patriarchal societies, there's an exploration of sexuality, because our main character does want to be with a woman, but in this society, she is not able to do so. I think that one of the biggest issues that I had with this book, as with everyone that has read this book, is that the world building just was not enough. I think I wanted to know a little bit more about what happened with Cinderella and why things happened the way that they happened, and how this world was before we got to this point. And I don't think we got some of that, but I wanted a lot more. And I definitely could feel like, I was feeling like, dang, like I didn't get as much information as I wanted to in terms of the world building. I wasn't like 100% invested in the characters. Like I don't want to say I didn't care, but I think that this one would have been excellent with the additional world building and a little bit more of the character development that maybe we were looking for. It didn't do it for me the way I think that it was supposed to, which is why I only ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. I also read Something is Killing Children, volume number 3. I needed to catch up on the issues in this because I wanted to start reading the single issues and not wait for the 4th bind-up of this. Of course, this is by James Tynion in the 4th. I mean, enough said. Like, if you watch his channel, you know me, you know I love James so much, and this series has become an instantaneous hit. People love it. I think it's been optioned. I'm not sure. Don't take that with a grain of salt, but I think it's been optioned. But I can't really tell you much about this volume, to be honest with you. Like, there's nothing I can tell you, because this is like issues, this has got to be like issues like 12 through like 15 or 16 or something like that. 11 through like 15 maybe. Something along those lines. So this is deep into the framework of this story, of this narrative. I can tell you that it is about this town in which these children are going missing, and something is killing them and they don't know what it is. And this main character, Erica Slaughter, shows up to help this young boy figure out what's happening after he claims that he sees his close friends from school get killed by this monster, and nobody really believes him, and everybody thinks he's the one that's done it. So it's about her coming to town because she's aware of what's going on and trying to fix and clean everything up, which is great because I believe House of Slaughter now has gotten its own spinoff. I think the first issue came out a couple of weeks ago. I haven't read it yet, but I definitely will be checking it out. This is definitely a 5-star read for me. If you have not read Something is Killing the Children, you are definitely missing out. I also ended up reading Allergic, and this is another middle grade graphic novel by Megan Wagner Lloyd, and this is an ode to all of us who suffer from really shitty allergies, that grew up wanting pets as kids and could not get them. This is such a perfect look at that experience, where our main character wants a dog and her parents finally give her the okay to get a dog, and she tries to go and get the dog, and then she has this huge allergic reaction, and she realizes that she can't have pets because she's allergic to pretty much everything. It goes over like having to get allergy shots, and even with allergy shots, it doesn't make you like not allergic, it just helps with the symptoms. And so I think it's a great exploration of like having allergies, and I appreciated this as an adult because I have really, really bad allergies, and I feel bad because I feel like my daughter's gonna grow up and be like, mommy, I want da-da-da, and I'm gonna have to be like, mommy has really, really bad allergies, and I think that she's gonna end up having really, really bad allergies too, and this is gonna be a great resource for me when she gets older, or maybe hopefully, by the time that she gets old enough, there'll be more stuff out there like this. But this is such an important aspect, because I know people like think, oh yeah, having an animal is so like blase, because so many people do have animals, but then there's so many kids out there who can't get animals because their allergies are just too bad to get animals. So this was great. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. It was a quick read. I read this in one setting and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, so I'm trying to hurry up because I have just 3 last things that I read. I'm not going to go into too much deep diving because this video is already super, super long, but I did end up reading a Pho Love Story by Loan Lee, and this is about Bao and Lin, and they have parents who both have a pho restaurant, and they are not supposed to be friends. Like, I think they were friends when they were younger, but then there's this rivalry between the restaurants, and the two of them end up meeting again when they're in high school. They get along. There's clearly a romance that's developing there, but their parents are like, you can't be friends with such and such. You can't, you can't hang out with this person. And it's crazy because I was like, this is so stupid. Like, what is going on? But like, the actual reveal of why they can't hang out, or why their parents are so opposed to them hanging out, is so deep. It is so much deeper than what I anticipated. I was like, wow, there's a lot of conversation and exploration of the Vietnam War and the impact that it's had on the Vietnamese community, and it plays a big role in this entire story. And I'm so glad that there was that exploration, because I have been reading a lot of books that feature Asian characters, or books that are written by Asian writers lately, and I have not read one yet that speaks to the Vietnamese experience and how the Vietnam War impacted immigrants who have had to come here. So not only were we just getting this incorporation of Vietnamese culture through food, but we were getting like even some language things in there, where we were able, and I'm glad I listened to this on audio, because I was able to hear Vietnamese, and I was able to learn more about the impact of the Vietnam War on people who have immigrated here from Vietnam. And it was just so good. I think it presents itself almost as like fluffy, you know, like star-crossed lovers, like, you know, kind of like Romeo and Juliet. You know, we can't speak to each other because our families don't like each other, but it's so damn deep. It's so much deeper than that, and I really did enjoy this one, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. I also ended up reading a Christina C. Jones this month. I don't think I read one by her last month, so I was kind of fiending a little bit, because I was participating in the dark romance readathon, and I read 2 books for that, and this is the first of the 2 that I read, and this is the first book in the Vegas Night series. It is it's darker because of the fact that we have a hero that kidnaps a heroine, and it's a marriage in crisis, because it's Denver and Kensa. They have issues, and the issues that they have are pushing them to divorce. And I will say that there's a content warning for miscarriage, so I would keep that in mind when reading this book. But they're having issues, and Kensa's like, I'm done. I'm serving you with papers. We're divorcing. And Denver's kind of like, no. Not happening. And it was really, I mean, it was slightly on the darker side, but it was hot. It was great. It was well written, of course, in true Christina C. Jones fashion, and I can't wait to pick up the other 2 in the series, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. I also ended up listening to like a short story, which is a prelude to another series by Antoine Bendelli, and this is Willow the Mischief Maker, an old god story, Orishas Among Mortals, #1. There's another one, but I wanted to read this one first, and then the book that comes after it is a YA series, and it's called TJ Young and the Orishas, and the book itself is actually called The Gatekeeper's Staff, which, I'm sorry, I know, like, I'm looking down, but I wanted to make sure that I got that title right. So it focuses on Ishu, who wants a human body, and he has to formulate a plan for the original architect to help him do this. And Ishu is a trickster god, and he has to help him, you know, he has to help convince the original or old architect to help him create a human body. And it's really cute. It's I don't know if it was meant to be like sweet and endearing, but it was sweet and endearing, and I really can't tell you much about it because it is extremely short, but that's kind of like the premise of it. And I thought it was enjoyable. I ended up giving it 3.5 out of 5 stars, and it is a segue into that second series. So if you're looking for more like an indie kind of fantasy series to check out, I would recommend reading that one first. And the last book that I ended up reading was also for the dark romance readathon, and it is King by T.M. Frazier, this is the first book in the King series, and this is dark. This one is dark. It is about this young woman named Doe, which clearly her name is not really Doe, but she's Jane Doe. She doesn't have any memory of her past, and she's homeless, and she comes across King and their biker gang type of thing, and she's pretty much willing to do anything for food and a place to stay. And he takes her in, and there's definitely alpha male characteristics going on there, and King is just not the nicest person. He's really not, but of course there's a romance that does ensue that builds when you start to learn more about King's past and possibly Doe's past, and he definitely starts to care for her in a different way, in a way that I think he wasn't expecting. But he's very like crass, very just he's not an easy cookie to deal with, and it's clear from the contents of the book that he's not an easy cookie to deal with. But I did enjoy this one. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I think this is one of those books that you kind of have to stick with, because if you don't stick with it, you're not going to enjoy it, because he is hard. He's hard to deal with. He's done some time. There's a lot of, and I don't want to say what is motivating him to do some of the things that he's doing, because I think it low-key kind of is like a spoiler, but there's some things that he's doing that low-key are cruel, but there's a reason behind it, and you really don't find out those layers and those reasons until later on in the book. So I definitely would just, if you do read this book, keep in mind that he's a hardcore character, and I think that you gotta give the book some time. It's one of those that, like, first appearances are not everything, because there's a lot of twists and turns. There's a lot of depth to this book that I don't think I was anticipating, because of how dark it literally starts, and I'm like, oh gosh, do I want to keep doing this? But I was like, you know what, I'm gonna keep going. And when I kept reading it, and I was like, okay, like there's layers to these characters, and that's probably the best part of like this author's like writing, is the plot itself is crazy, but then there's this character development where no one should be taken at face value. There's so many layers to them because of all of these experiences that they've had. And I mean, both of them have had some really crappy experiences. Like, both main characters have had some crappy experiences. So it's important to keep that in mind when reading the story. But like I said, I did end up enjoying it. I will be continuing on with the series, and I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. All right, y'all. So I don't really know how many books that was that I wrapped up, and I'm pretty sure that I left out at least one book, but that is a-okay. I promise you, like, one of these days I'm gonna get back to the point of being like super organized, but until then, here we are. This is what we're doing, and it is a-okay that this is kind of how I'm doing my wrap-ups for now. But as always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more content from me, click the subscribe button. If you want to get notifications, make sure you hit that bell. Looking for ways to support the channel, or for ways to follow me on social media, all that be down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon. Bye.